Welcome to the Up Close podcast, where every week we introduce you to the thought leaders, the activists, and the social entrepreneurs working for change. I'm your host, Chris Tinney, and today we have a very special guest for you. I can't wait to share with you. He's been a good friend of mine for the last 8 years. I have learned a lot from him. Today you're going to meet Scott C. Miller. He is the founder of Circles USA, which is celebrating its 25th year anniversary this year. Scott founded that 25 years ago, obviously. He's now moved on to a new project, which is the Poverty Solution. And I get excited. I get excited because there is a solution to poverty. And people will say, well, how do you know that? Well, because I met this guy. I met this guy about 8 years ago, and somebody handed me one of several books that he's written. And it talked about how we can actually end poverty. And I read it, and I told my wife, I said, I think we can do more than handing out sandwiches. And so I called him up. He was the second guest when I was on the radio in Las Vegas. It was a great call. He's the founder of the Poverty Solution, as I mentioned, which is a private consulting firm with working with some select communities and designing and implementing new poverty alleviation systems. We're going to talk about that. Well, what we have right now is a poverty management system, and everybody gets paid to hand out more food, to put more people in the beds at the shelter. Nobody's being paid to actually get them out of poverty. He's helped communities raise over $200 million for local programs and assisted families and completely moving out of poverty. He's the author of several books, and his work has been featured on numerous national outlets, including CBS, CNN, NPR, Huffington Post, TEDx. Okay, I can stop there, but it goes on. And the Stanford Innovation Review. He's dedicated to designing and implementing innovative programs to help people escape poverty. Scott, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. It has been a long ride since we met, hasn't it?
It has. I got to tell you something. You've given me a PhD in poverty alleviation this last 8 years. I think that I've been amazed at what I've learned from you, and it's an honor to introduce you to all my listeners and share some information that's coming from your upcoming book. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too, folks. So you want to make sure you sign up for my newsletter or comment wherever if you're watching this live or listening to it live, or LinkedIn or Facebook on a live stream. Just put in the comments that you want me to send you the info on the book. We'll make sure we get that to you. So Scott, how did you get involved in trying to eradicate poverty?
I went to school to become an architect. Isn't that how most people get into this business? And I got talked into a direction that was not for me. They were so picky about the corners meeting on my drawings. I'm like, isn't there going to be computers someday? I mean, this was back in 75. I thought, I don't need to be the one making these corners meet. And they're like, you're not the one to be in this program. So I left architecture. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a friend. He's a Catholic priest. I had met him up at a big Boy Scout camp in the Adirondacks where we were both working for summers. And anyway, he said to me, you should go volunteer in a homeless shelter. And I said, because I was from the suburbs and poverty never crossed my radar. And I said, what are those? That's a 18 out of touch, typical suburban kid with a lot of other things on his mind besides all of this issues of poverty. So I went there, and it really changed my worldview pretty quickly. I thought all this destitution, right, very close by, never discussed in any part of my life, not church, not school, not home, not with friends, nowhere. So I went back to school and I got into organizational behavior because I was really intrigued by how organizations function. And I did a lot of sociology courses. And when I got out, one of my first jobs was working with a charities agency, and I was meeting 40 people a week. And I gave them financial assistance. But when when the job was explained to me, they said, you have $1,000 to work with. And they're describing the problems that people were coming in with. And I said, you mean for every family, that's the top limit of the budget? They're like, nope, that's your budget for the month for everybody. I thought, really? You're peddling this idea to all these congregations, they donate money, and you say you're taking care of the poor. Yeah. So I got volunteers to do that kind of work because I was really interested in, like, where's the answer to this? And there weren't any programs to refer people to back then. You couldn't say, hey, where's the out of poverty program? I'm going to send people from, here's $50. I hope this helps, but I know it's not going to really help that much. But you could go to this program, and there really wasn't one. And then a couple years later, I meet, maybe it wasn't even that long, might have been a year later, I met some people from Iowa who had a large agency working with anti-poverty programming. They had 100 different funders, and they kept asking people, "Have got, did you get out of poverty? And if so, which of our programs did it?" Hardly anybody did. And the ones that did, they married somebody with a job. And so, they just sit back and say, we have 100 plus programs that aren't getting people out of poverty. A dating
Wow.
service seems to be in order here. I mean, what else? You think about it, one job's better than two, and two jobs are better than,
Right.
I mean, one job's better than none, and two are better than one. So, I mean, if you wanted to be cynical about the system, you would say this gigantic poverty management system that we have could be replaced by a very sophisticated dating service that would cut down the cost of housing, get people involved with other networks, get more support, have more childcare, everything, that happens when you're really in solid relationships with other people. But the problem is, a lot of the country, our households are divided. They don't do well together, and people get abused. And so it's important that they leave when they need to leave. And it's very difficult for people to stabilize their family life when you have poverty. Poverty exacerbates everything. So when I took a look at what program they put together in Iowa, I thought, well, this makes sense. You're building a plan with somebody. So you have a social worker, they go to the home, they build a plan. And the idea is to get you whatever amount of money you need to get out of poverty and to work with you until that happens. This is a rare, I mean, that makes so much sense, right? But it was super rare anywhere in the country to find a program like this. So I called them up. I brought them out to Ohio. We set up $1 million worth of projects with foundations in Cleveland, Cincinnati, Canton, Akron, and another big place in Ohio that's not, Columbus. It was a long time ago. And so we built these projects, and they were all pilots funded by the foundations, about 50 of them. And I tried to sell it to the state. I said, look, we're really making traction here. We've got 800 people in this project, and a lot of them are making really good, they're having good results. And it looks like it's going to cost about $3,000 a year to support them, and you're going to save a ton of money. But the state was in boxes like they all are, right? And it's like, well, we only have a box for $1,000 out service program. And so I hired a lobbyist to just try to get in there and work it, and it didn't happen. So I told the folks in Iowa, look, let me move out there as soon as I can figure out where Iowa is, because I've never been west. So I go to Iowa, and we get a great relationship going with the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And for the next 10 years, they invested in us trying to figure stuff out. So that's the early days of this before we got into what was called circles, and certainly before we got into what we call now the poverty solution.
So we could talk all day about circles, because that's an incredible program. It's gotten thousands of individuals and families out of poverty. I invite people to take a look at that. 40 years later, nearly 40 years later now, you're working with some communities, counties, agencies, private foundations to pilot a new project, the poverty alleviation system. But before we talk about that, give us the lay of the land today. What is yours? You're so passionate about this. You have a sense of urgency about this. Can you just share with us a little bit about why you have that feeling of urgency, and what is the landscape out there currently with the poverty management system?
Sure.
And why are you so sure that we can actually solve it? That we have
Let me hit all those three questions, Chris. So first of all, my observation is that there's a poverty management system in every community. And what that means is that, for example, the feds invest over $1 trillion a year in welfare programming. A lot of that's Medicaid, about $600 billion of that. But these programs are all administered. There's 80 of them. There's 80 plus of them flowing from the federal government into the states. And then they all have their own rules. And then really it's up to people who need the services to navigate their way through it all. So the burden of navigating this complexity is placed onto the family with the least amount of attention to be able to put on this right now, because they're in a crisis with poverty and it's exhausting. Then you have about $1 trillion worth of fallout by raising kids in poverty. This has been studied quite well. And you can see that extra health care, extra issues around crime, also reduced productivity in the workforce. All that adds up to $1 trillion of fallout. So you're looking at least $2 trillion worth of investment being made in just keeping the poverty rate at the same level that we've had it for 50 years. It hasn't gone up or down very much at all. So it's been 12 to 15%. And that poverty rate is determined still, as it was back in the 60s, by taking the cost of food and multiplying it by 3 and saying, hey, if you can make that kind of money, then you should be out of poverty. So today it's like $21,000 a year for a family of 3. You try to pull all that together. I think one of the things that makes everything more urgent is COVID in a way, and the baby boomers is the other issue. So you've got two interesting forces happening. The post-COVID housing has just gone through the roof, all the pun intended on that one. You've got a ginormous portion of people's income being spent on surviving through their housing situation. Then the cost of childcare has gone up. This should be about 7% of people's budgets, but it approaches more like 30 to 40%. And then you've got the baby boomers are bailing. I mean, they are retiring. They're at 65, every day, 10,000 of them turn 65. And so the baby boomers have been big employers. They've also made the job market pretty easy for employers. The labor pool has been big and very rich with people that want to get into the workforce for decades, but that's gone away. Now, look, you go to any institution and they're struggling. If it's entry-level workers they're looking for, they can't find enough. So why is that? Well, part of the reason is it's also COVID, but it's also that there's less talent in the workforce than there used to be. And of course, there's all sorts of shifts happening with AI and automation and a lot of things that are eradicating a lot of blue-collar jobs. So what we have is a growing issue with poverty. We have a tremendous crisis with both healthcare and housing costs, and it's creating these tensions as this poverty grows. It puts enormous pressure on communities. There's a community out in South Carolina that I visited, and they were super successful at gentrifying their little city. And then the suburbs around it became packed with people in poverty. And these suburbs were not at all equipped to handle this. And you'll start seeing more and more of this as areas get good at economic development. They tend to push people who can't afford to live there anymore into other areas. And there's no social service infrastructure to support people who have some need to be on public assistance. So one of the things that is indicative of the poverty management system is the cliff effect. The benefits cliff effect basically is an administrative convenient structure that creates this huge problem of getting off of public assistance, because you can go out, work 40 hours you weren't working before a week, and make less total spending power at the end of the day because you lost a buck more in income can produce $4 an hour loss in childcare. Or now you have employer health insurance and you're paying huge deductibles, you're paying premiums, and it eats up this extra earned income. And people are out of balance. We've been working with the Federal Reserve in Atlanta on building, calculators to be able to help people get a heads up. Like, if I take this job or this raise or more hours, what happens? So, Chris, think about this. This giant phantom workforce gets created. People that would work, could work, should work, want to work, but can't. The math doesn't work out. And they still need childcare. They still need housing. They still need food stamps. They still need some cash, even if they're working full time.
Right.
Because the cost of living is incredibly high. And no one's done whatever calculus is required to get the on-ramps and the off-ramps of the public assistance program, this $1.1 trillion program kaleidoscope we have. No one's done the work to smooth those ramps off. So we have millions and millions and millions of people sitting on the sidelines.
They can't take a job.
Who want a job and can't really put it together. They're so
I've met so many people. I've met so many parents, I'll say mostly women that I've met, that took a job and were totally unprepared that they were going to lose their childcare. Right. And the childcare was more than they were making at their job. if you have 2 or 3 kids. It's amazing. It just so tell me a little bit about your solution, the poverty solution. And folks, you can learn more at povertysolution.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter there so you stay informed. But you're piloting in several communities right now, large communities, your program, the poverty solution, and actually putting it into place. So what is the poverty solution, and how are you implementing it in those communities? And more importantly, how are you going to measure those results? Because you mentioned how none of these other people get paid for actually getting results and getting people out of poverty. And how does the
Well,
poverty solution that you've
to be
created solve
clear,
that?
people in the the organizations in the poverty management system get paid to provide a particular unit of service, but they're not being paid to make to ensure people are making progress out of poverty. So no one's really getting paid at the end of the day through any of these 80 programs or any of this $1 trillion to get people out of poverty. That is the elephant in the room. I mean, follow the money. It's the elephant in the room. How many people did you get out of poverty? I don't know. How many did I have to get out to get my payments? None. Okay,
Right.
that's how many I got out. Anyway, when you take just one more comment about the poverty management system, and then I'll move on to the solution that I think we need. When you look at any industry, just take tech, for example, there is an enormous percent of the income that goes, the revenues that go into research and development, so that there's just a constant improvement of the system. But when you take a look at the $1.1 trillion investment by the feds, it's a tiny little R&D amount of money going into fixing the system and making sure it does what it's supposed to do. So you have this continuous improvement, but it's towards compliance. It's focused on, hey, did they get what they deserve and not get what they didn't deserve based on the eligibility and the rules of the program? I mean, it's a silly filter to make decisions about what the heck you're doing with $1 trillion. The Department of Labor spends about $10 billion a year on workforce development. So, I mean, if you spent 30, let's just say you spent even just 7 to 10% of $1 trillion on R&D, it'd be 70, 80 billion, right? 90 billion, 100 billion bucks. But DOL spending 10 billion to get people out, but that's not really their intent is to place people. Hopefully they stay in those jobs. But again, I don't see, when I've been, in 150 different places in the last decade even, and I don't see that accountability to people getting jobs, that everything's been put together, the cliff effect's been mitigated, they're able to pay their bills, they understand how to manage their money well enough, they've got money set aside for savings. There is just a small percent of people that actually have that experience where they can get public assistance and get off of it and be okay. So there needs to be a lot more money. Then you go over to the philanthropy side of things, and there's an estimated 80 billion being spent there on poverty stuff, but it's everybody. There's all sorts of people in that space investing small amounts of money. It's not coordinated. It's not like it's one company like Apple doing its own research and being able to reinvest in what it's learning and make better products and services. No, it's just so random. Anyway, Buckminster Fuller one day said, way back when, do not try to change the old system, right? Just build a new one. Right. And that's how I feel about it. The old system, it's just outdated. It's not focused on the same set of outcomes that a new system would be. And so I had slipped into all the contracts with Circles when I was back running it. You have to somehow work your way to the top of the food chain and find a way to get 10% of the kids out of poverty. Find a way to get somebody interested in that kind of an idea. And it was just recently that I got a phone call from Tennessee, a guy named Richard Taylor, who runs a data company. And he talked to you, right? You called me, and then we started talking. And Richard said, there's in Upper Cumberland, Tennessee, there's 14 counties in between Chattanooga, Knoxville, and Nashville that are being supported by this group, the Upper Cumberland Human Resource Agency. And I thought, okay, so what do they want to do? Well, there's a new commissioner in town, and he's going to be putting out these innovation grants. So when I found out it was Clarence Carter, I've known Clarence, for 20 years, and he actually spoke at our Circles USA conference in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago. And I talked to him when he was running the welfare system at the national level and about the cliff effect. And so I was pretty excited about what he was doing. So he somehow got an agreement to spend TANA surplus funds, a couple $100 million, on 7 innovation projects. So we helped them. There were like 81 applicants, and we helped them get a planning grant. 17 of them got that. And then out of that group, 7 got the awards, and we helped them get those awards. So my team helped design and write that application. And it was like, oh my gosh, a chance to build a new system, right? There's $25 million spent over 3 years. We'll get the hire team. We'll probably be able to work with 700-800 families and see what happens. So that's what happened. So this is becoming the poverty solution, right? We have 700 families enrolled in the program. All of them are on public assistance, TANF recipients. They have children. And they're all in very, very, I would say, extremely difficult situations to get success with. The partners include the workforce development folks, private training folks who are preparing people with soft skills and hard skills to get into jobs. We've got the local foundation at the hospital involved. There is even the PBS station is involved, providing ready to learn programming for the kids. We've got, of course, this big agency, Upper Cumberland, and their development district, which is doing economic development work, is also involved. We have been able to also engage Tennessee Tech, biggest employer in the area. And all of this partnership building has taken quite a bit of time and energy to figure out, how do you get groups that are being paid in the poverty management system and all this random funding to collaborate, in something that is very different. Like, we are going to build these job pathways. They will be insulated pipelines to certified employers that are willing to understand poverty well enough that we can get traction with folks. Somehow we're going to mitigate the cliff effect. We built in a $5 million fund to just deal with stuff like, milestones to, provide incentives for people, but also to how much do you need in order to take this job? This job can lead to a career, which can lead to enough money that you can catapult yourself past this benefit cliff.
You brought together so many partners. And I heard you talk about economic development being involved. I don't hear a lot of people in the poverty space talking about economic development. So share with me a little bit about your philosophy on that.
Well, for years, I hiked up the Sandia Mountains with an economic development expert. So I got an earful on what is happening from that perspective. But what's interesting is that really qualifying people in your own backyard is going to have to be the task that businesses are going to have to do if they want to be able to sustain and expand their businesses in many of our rural communities. You can't import talent like you used to. It's just very difficult. And so in a way, you got to grow your own, which means that hard to place folks because of the cliff effect, because of the poverty background, because of other issues. You have to figure out how to get these folks into jobs and retain them and advance them. And so there's never been this shortage of workers and an overlap with the anti-poverty agenda. I mean, you could say that reducing poverty is now a strong economic development strategy because it makes your community stronger, more attractive for new business. It allows the current businesses to be able to. I was in Nebraska consulting, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And they were telling me that they were flying people in from Florida and elsewhere down in the South, staying at a Red Roof Inn to work on the factory floor. Wow. These are good jobs, but they could not find the people to fill these jobs. So it's an incredible time right now to notice that economic development is at the table. And the Florida Chamber of Commerce got one of its most popular stories ever out there in terms of the response that came back from employers when they started talking about the benefits cliff. People don't understand, like, why did they leave? I just offered them a raise. This guy we were working with in Utah, his employer loves him, but he's got 3 kids. He's raising those kids by himself, and they're all in childcare. And the employer wants to give him a raise. He does the math. He's like, I can't take the raise. I mean, if I take the buck, I'll lose $4. I'll lose all my childcare. I'll go over the threshold. There's no slope. It's just boom, you're done. It's organized by categories.
Wow.
It's organized in these categories. And so the employer was like, what are you telling me? Yeah. So in this case, the employer gave him a raise past the cliff, which,
Wow. That's great.
That's unusual. You can't expect employers to do that. What you can expect, though, for $1 trillion, it's someone in DC would start working on this, really start working on it.
Well, I know one of the things you're passionate about is creating the next generations of leaders that are going to address poverty in a completely different way, such as the way we're discussing right now. Can you share with me a little bit about, and I know you're training leaders right now with the poverty solution. That's part of the overall package that people are partnering with you on. Tell me, what is a leader to you, and what do we need them to do in the coming years?
Well,
how do we create them?
What we need, a lot of people in our space are familiar with what's called a collective impact. Collective impact is where you get a lot of different organizations across the sectors, so business, civic, faith, foundations, government, et cetera. You get these groups to share a goal, like we're going to increase the graduation rates by 20% or something. And that's what we need to do in this case. We need to get these collective impact, and these are called backbone organizations. They build capacity, they negotiate, they just keep everybody on track. They do a great job of communicating across all these sector lines. But in our situation, my suggestion is we try to get 10% of the kids out in a specific region, footprint. I don't care if it's a zip code, a county. In the case of Upper Cumberland, it's 14 counties, that we're trying to do this in. So they have 16,000 kids in poverty, so about 800 households, and we're trying to get 800 out so we can start to see if that creates a tipping point, because there's some evidence that if, for a minority idea, like let's end poverty, to become the majority opinion, like maybe we could and should, you need about 10% of the world to agree to that. So there's just some interesting research that came out of Rensselaer way back. So leaders have to build these kind of organizations, and the leader needs to get his or her head out of management and into leading. And leading is, what's the vision? Okay, you got to tell a lot of people about the vision. We're trying to get 10% of these kids out of poverty. We're trying to create a poverty alleviation system. We're going to stay with people until they get over the finish line. And here are all the challenges, and here's what you can do to help. That's what the leader does almost all week long, just talking to stakeholders, getting this agreement, getting these innovations to happen, being persistent about what is it going to take? How do we fix the benefit cliff? What's it going to take to get people into these jobs? How do we build these new relationships across these program lines? These leaders will spend at least 70% of their time sharing this vision and then facilitating the learning. What's the data that we need to look at and pay attention to? Progress out of poverty, that's a big one. But also, what are the quality of the jobs? Can we get better situations with the healthcare? Can we fix the cliff effect and have an on and off ramp from Medicaid? I mean, what are the regulations that we can throw out the window? Already Tennessee has been challenged. They've been challenged. Our project has been challenging the state to get rid of some of these childcare regulations so that there can be more affordable childcare developed in the region. And it's working. That's starting to ease up. So the leader is looking at the data. They are articulating this vision. They're helping people learn how to get better results. And then whatever works, they're embedding it. They're figuring out, how do I make this part of the scenery here? So for example, we're always looking at the budgets of all these partners, saying, can you now that you've been involved with this project, can you redirect resources to this longer game, this more successful path that we've built out here? Can you put more of your time and attention and staff on these things and keep up these partnerships? We can get some new money, but let's use that to expand on what we just did. And let's let go of poverty management stuff.
Wow.
So that's
Exciting.
that's
That's
what
exciting.
that's what needs to happen, and not just Tennessee. And we're starting to do this work in Maryland and a couple of places, but it needs to happen coast to coast. So we need to have a critical mass of communities agreeing that yeah, you could end poverty if you got intentional about it. Think of everything cool that's ever been done on Earth. Somebody thought it could be done, and a lot
When
more
I first met you,
people
I thought it was
could be done.
crazy. Your first book, ending poverty. I thought it was crazy when I first, thought about the, what would it look like if we really eradicated poverty? I mean, and it's hard to contemplate. But the more you learn about it, and the more I've known you over the years, it's completely possible. I mean, and you're making it happen right now with the poverty solution. So tell me, if somebody goes to the povertysolution.com, they sign up for the newsletter. I know that you have a couple of things that you do with people. I think the first thing's an assessment. What does that involve?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is that we just assess a couple of things. First of all, what's up with the community? We're doing an assessment right now in a very small community up in Maryland, and we're looking at, for example, how many housing units do they really need that are affordable. There's a couple of ideas on the table about addressing that housing problem, but everyone, in order to get housing and to sustain it, needs to get out of poverty and stay out of poverty. So what does all that look like in your community right now? What's working that might be something that could be scaled? What are you missing that we might be able to find in another part of the country and help you import it into your community? What capacity do you have in your organization to be able to write, get grants, make pitches, go, make deals happen? What kind of cooperation do you already have across sectors? How interested is the business arena? So all these major questions, it starts with just a conversation really with the key leader. And then from there, we make a list of other leaders that we want to interview and talk with. And we put together an assessment that says, we think you should go down this particular road. And yeah, there are going to be course corrections, but here's a starting place. And, that becomes the build out of a new system, trying to understand what are the gems already in the community that we should anchor this onto. And then who wants to scale the good stuff, and how do you become a magnet for new resources? Because once the word gets out, you're trying to get families out of poverty, and you have any particular success, you have a chance to continue getting innovative money. A lot of the Circle chapters are still running on innovation money, because they're unique and different, and they're pointing in an important direction for where the entire system should move towards. Because at Circles, we were always committed to getting families out of poverty. Well, when that's when I was back there, right? They still are. I'm just saying, Circles is one of the few programs out there that has results and evidence to say that you can get people completely out of poverty, when in fact, most of the families gave up themselves and people gave up on them because we had the problem of a poverty management system all over us.
Right. And I don't know any organization like Circles that's done so much to actually get people out of poverty. And now you're doing it on a large scale with the poverty alleviation system. So let's say I get my assessment, I've got my roadmap, I know what needs to be done. Then somebody can hire your team to actually implement that over a year, 2 years, 3 years.
Well, what we do is, so there's a fee for the assessment. I mean, there's initial conversation that's no charge, just to see if people are interested in doing the assessment. But once we do that assessment, they'll have the outline of a plan. Like, this is what we recommend gets done. And then we can help them go out and secure resources. And that's what we did in Tennessee. Once we just built ourselves into the planning grant. So we were funded to help design and lead all of that work, which got all these stakeholders involved and contracts set up and arrangements made. And then we were built into the research grant itself. So, we joined people in, let's go find what we need to find for resources to do a really successful pilot. And that pilot we'll be evaluating it throughout the entire process and seeing what should be scaled up. How do you get to scale? This is something that, is the big question across the country. How do you scale the good stuff? How do we stop being small lemonade stands that are cool? But I mean, how do you really scale up a solution that gets millions of people out of poverty? And what are those really, really big changes that should be made at the federal level, where most of the money for these kind of programs are coming from. What are those really huge changes, and how do those changes get instigated? Because I know what the changes need to be.
Right.
And a lot of people do, but we need the political will and the clarity to get that to happen. So these pilots all point towards, well, here's what communities need, so make it happen.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, now we ran over our time a little bit. Is there anything you want to close out with or leave people with? I know they can connect with you on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and obviously they can go to The Poverty Solution. That's THE. Don't forget thepovertysolution.com and sign up for the newsletter. Probably the best thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we're just 2 years into the 3-year pilot, and we are building out a toolbox, which we believe will be ready in about a month, 2 at the most, to be able to use with other communities. But, in the interim, I would just say, follow our story, get a hold of us. We will start putting you in the queue. And as we feel confident that we've got all the right tools in place, we'll start helping out. And I think, probably end of this year, early next year, we're going to be working with a inner circle of new communities that want to do this kind of work with us and learn together how we get the poverty rates to come down. That is going to be an exciting community of practice for people. So if people are interested in being part of all that, then definitely get a hold of us. And
that's great. Well, folks, I'll put a link in the Poverty Solution down here at the bottom, wherever you happen to be seeing this at. And I want to let you know that I'm back on the air. Thanks for joining us on Up Close, where you meet the thought leaders, the activists, and the social entrepreneurs that are making a difference in this world today. Make sure you share it. Show me some love. Leave comments. Tell your friends. I'll see you next week on Up Close.